that the Sabbath day would be a sign, a perpetual sign, meaning eternal, throughout all the generations of the nation of Israel, which includes us, because keep in mind, we are saved under the covenant of the house of Israel. There really is no covenant to the Goyim or covenant to the Gentile. If you are saved, you are grafted into the house of Israel and saved as the Lord says, heirs to the seed of Abraham. So we are also held to that perpetual covenant of the Sabbath day, as we would with all the Ten Commandments. It's not a situation where we're elevating the Sabbath commandment above any of the others. As a matter of fact, if you look at, I believe it's James 2:10, he points out, he who offends in one point is guilty of all. And then he lists 3 or 4 of the commandments, and then he says, and he who said these also said this, as an example, giving another commandment. But the point is that James is making in chapter 2 is that the law of God, specifically the Ten Commandments, are one law. It is not 10 different laws. It is one law codified by the 10 Commandments. And so if you break any one of the 10, you are breaking the whole law, and that is exactly what James says. And here's something to note, and this goes back to the biblical hermeneutics, is that James, the book of James, and I could give the exact year, was written probably, they estimate 30 to 40 years after the crucifixion. Now the reason that's important is because many would say, well, at the time of the crucifixion, that's when the new covenant started, and it was after that point that the Sabbath was done away with, and so on. Well, here, that statement or that belief would be a complete contradiction and violation of the biblical hermeneutical principles of understanding the context and the timeline of when the Scriptures were written. Why would John be teaching that we need to keep the Ten Commandments 30 years after the crucifixion if at the crucifixion they had been done away with or abrogated or altered in some way? So I apologize, Rick. That was a really long answer.
Oh no, that's actually, you answered it sufficiently. I was thinking about how when Christ died, he actually, before he died, he mentioned to the apostles that when they would have to flee, that make sure it wasn't on either the winter or the Sabbath or whatnot. And he was prophesying, the persecution that would happen after his death. So clearly it was showing that, the disciples of Christ, the followers, i.e. Christians, should be obedient to God. Now, another question. Where did the Sabbath actually originate? Because some people think that the Sabbath started when God gave the Ten Commandments. Is that true?
No, actually, the Sabbath was created during the creation week, and that is when the Lord rested the seventh day according to the commandment and hallowed it and sanctified it. And so in reality, it is interesting. I do hear that argument a lot that, well, the Lord did not, we don't hear him commanding Abraham or Noah or any of the patriarchs to keep the commandment or keep the Sabbath day. But yet it's funny, they don't mention that he never really commanded them to keep any of the Ten Commandments, as far as I know, but we know that they did. And we also know that sin existed back then, because the Bible does say, and I will probably have to go back and give reference for a lot of these, but it says that sin reigned from Adam to Moses. So we know that sin existed starting as far back as Adam, and according to, I believe it's John, and I'll have to go back and look at these scriptures, sin is the transgression of the law. So if sin did not exist, there would be no law, or I should say vice versa. If the law did not exist, there could be no sin. So we know that the law existed, and the question is, what law existed? Well, we believe it was the Ten Commandments. Numerous parts in Scripture, it states that the Ten Commandments are immutable. They stand fast forever and ever. That's in Psalms, and so on. So it is my understanding, my belief, and from my studies, I have found that the Ten Commandments have existed really, probably maybe even from the foundation of the world, or from the foundation of creation, the Ten Commandments have existed. But at the Sabbath, well, I suppose with the Sabbath day, that would have to be creation, that specific week.
Right.
So.
Right. Like I just found the text actually is found in Genesis chapter 2, which mentions the very first Sabbath that existed. And it's interesting that I remember a minister touching over this, the two principles that God established before he even provided the commandments to Adam and the generations going forward was marriage and the Sabbath. When he first created Adam and Eve, he set them together, and the scriptures do prove that Jesus said, what God has put together, let no one bring asunder. So that's one thing he touched upon. The other thing was the Sabbath. The Sabbath is found in Genesis chapter 2, and this is the very first mention. It says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which he had created and made. So many Christians believe in the creation story. And what is interesting is, I found this out through my own research, is how do we figure out the days in a year? We calculate this by the revolutions of the earth around the sun. It's approximately 360 to 365 days within a year. Okay? How do we figure out a month? A month is figured out by the revolutions of the moon around the earth. It's approximately 28 to 31 and a half days equal a literal month. Now, how do we figure out a week? How do we know that there are 7 days within the week? And it can only be found in the scriptures. It is only found in the beginning God created. That is the only way we have found that the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, and this basically rests on the backs of history. Okay? I wouldn't say every, but a lot of different cultures all across the world have a different word for the name Sabbath. And in the Hebrew, it's Shabbat, which means rest, to relax, to calm yourself down. And many think that the Sabbath was, people that promote the Sabbath preach legalism. No, it is not a form of legalism to say relax. In a 24-hour society that we live in, we do need time to actually sit back and relax and just, not focus ourselves with the daily confines of our life. So I appreciate God actually creating the Sabbath for us. And another thing I wanted to touch on, many speculate that Abraham did not have God's commandments, but this is clearly not the case, because in Genesis chapter 26, verse 5, it states this: because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. That's Genesis 26, verse 5. You can go back and look it up when you have the opportunity. And a lot of these facts can also be found at www.sabbathtruth.com, which was mentioned earlier. Now, I have a question for you, Mike.
Sure.
I know we have to take a break pretty soon, but I want to touch on this. Was the Sabbath made just for the Hebrews? Because a lot of people ask that. Was the Sabbath just made for the Hebrews, or was it made for everyone?
Well, that is a great question. And interestingly enough, I really like to point out that, I think most people recognize this, but prior to Abraham, there were no Jews, no Hebrews per se. Adam and Eve and Noah and all the patriarchs prior to Abraham